Let me talk to ya about WrestleQuest. This pro wrestling themed turn-based RPG has some of the most beautiful pixel art I've ever seen and some really neat combat mechanics. By the end of this video, everybody's gonna be saying, I need WrestleQuest. Yeah. Okay, that's enough of LA Knight for now. This is a game that I've been looking forward to ever since it was announced, and I've covered it in quite a few videos. And thanks to your support on those videos, Skybound Games actually reached out to sponsor a video. So this video is sponsored by Skybound Games. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check out WrestleQuest for yourself. So to start, the story is not exactly what I thought it was. I thought this was going to be real characters trying to make their way through the ranks of various wrestling promotions, but in fact, everyone in the game is a toy of some kind. You have full-on wrestling action figures, random animal toys, and not Legos. It's sort of a throwback to being a kid and pretending to wrestle with whatever toys you had lying around. By the time I got into wrestling in the early 2000s, I was kind of too old to play with toys, but if I was watching wrestling as a little kid, Michelangelo definitely would have beat Hulk Hogan in a match. As for the story itself, you'll play as two characters that you'll bounce back and forth between throughout the story. The first character is Muchacho Man Randy Santos. He's obviously a huge Macho Man Randy Savage fan with a Mexican twist. He sleeps under a poster of him at night in the gym that he works out in, and you'll even visit a giant statue that immortalizes him. Randy Santos just longs to be a great wrestling legend like his favorite, Randy Savage. Now, something that I want to point out, the developers clearly have a deep reverence for not only JRPGs, but wrestling culture on a whole. They'll talk about things like dark matches, and there's plenty of fun Easter eggs throughout the game. Maybe my favorite were your starting boots called chin music makers. Only true fans will get that one. And I'll touch on the JRPG aspects in a little bit. The other character that you'll play as is called Brink Logan. The easy comparison would be Shane McMahon, as he's a wrestler in his family's promotion. Now, their company isn't the biggest, certainly not the size of WWE, but the entire family is involved, including his own sister, who wears these really cool kind of rhinestone cowgirl outfits. And weirdly enough, she's also got the strongest move in the entire game. It's just absolutely devastating. Overall, the stories are fun ways to move the game along, but of the two, I vastly preferred Muchacho Man's story more. He seemed to have a more genuine, pure love for wrestling, which made him easier to root for. His story was also a little easier to follow, as his journey is more direct as he rises through the ranks, whereas Brink's takes more twists and turns, and it's a little harder to follow. Something I found weird and distracting were the scant bits of voice acting. Oftentimes they didn't match what the characters were saying at all and seemed completely random. They were just things to kind of flesh out the character, but it didn't really make sense. Take a listen.
So who's your favorite wrestler?
Such machismo. My secret, maple syrup.
I honestly would have preferred the game without them if I had the choice, but I guess they're not that bad in the long run. Now, one thing before moving on, and I'm still not quite sure how to feel about this, are a few cameos from YouTube creators Gerard the Completionist and Angry Joe. Now, they don't really play a part in the story itself, they're just random NPCs throughout the world. There are moments when it cuts to people podcasting, so it might have been more appropriate to have them doing that, but nope, they're just in the game. Now, if we're talking about a wrestling JRPG full of buff dudes, the only appropriate YouTuber to include in your game would have been David Vink. A missed opportunity for sure. Now, let's talk about that gameplay because it's real good. As I mentioned at the top, WrestleQuest is a classic JRPG at its heart. Everything from turn-based combat, leveling up, getting new abilities, getting new equipment, and world maps. Yes, you heard that right, genuine classic world maps. For the most part, WrestleQuest is quite linear. There's always an exclamation point on the screen showing you where you need to go next, and areas aren't super big, so it's really easy to figure out where you need to go next, and it's pretty hard to get lost. On occasion, you do have some side quests like this amazing pole dancing rhythm game. I don't want to spoil the others, but to say the least, there's plenty more throughout the game that are just as cool and interesting. The overall structure is something similar to a traditional JRPG where you'll have some story moments in a town, go to a dungeon, solve some puzzles while you're in that dungeon, fight some random battles, fight a boss, return to town, and then move on to the next one. While in these dungeons, you can see the enemies walking around, which I love. Death to random battles, please. Something else WrestleQuest does that I love is this treasure meter that'll always be in the corner when you're in areas. As you find treasure in areas, it'll fill up, letting you know how many you have left. Now, logically, this doesn't really make any sense, but from a quality of life standpoint, it's so welcomed. Plus, I felt incentivized to explore every area I was in so I could find every single one, and most of the time, that's exactly what I did. Now let's dig into the combat because it's pretty interesting. It's a turn-based system, and you can have up to 3 characters in your party at any given time, plus a manager character that can give you some passive abilities and passive buffs. Now, you basically have 4 options when in combat. You can strike an enemy, which is basically your basic attack. You have gimmicks, which are kind of your special abilities that will deplete your AP or MP. You have items that you can use, and you can also taunt your enemy, which builds your hype meter. Now let's talk about the hype meter because I feel like this is one of the coolest aspects of combat and makes it really stand out. Essentially, the more it builds, the more buffs you can unlock to your character, like you hit harder, you get more money after you complete a battle, as well as the ability to use certain gimmicks that you wouldn't be able to use otherwise, like tag team moves. Now you can build it up by performing moves, reflecting attacks back at enemies, taunting them, and much more. So each battle is sort of this cool balance of building hype and doing damage. And what's cool is you can even build hype before the matches with your entrance, which you can customize, by the way, so I appreciate that extra touch. You can also build hype by destroying objects in the environment before you run into an enemy. Now, something that'll happen pretty regularly in fights are these QTE-like button presses. Now, not every attack and not every time you get attacked will you have these, but most have them. Now, I played on PC and my muscle memory for the Xbox controller isn't as good as it is for PlayStation, so I found myself missing these button prompts a lot, but I don't really blame the game for that. I just blame myself as I kind of need to get better with it. And another thing that's cool in terms of it being wrestling themed is that certain enemies have to be pinned. Now, most random enemies you can just beat and then the battle's over, but with big boss enemies and with kind of captain enemies, if you will, need to be pinned. And the way you do that is lining up 2 swinging points at the same time 3 times in a row. It's really not that hard, but again, it really adds to that element of wrestling. And something else I like that really kind of brings a dynamic quality to the fights are these things called dramatic moments. Once again, it really leans into the wrestling aspect, trying to make these fights more interesting. So these will have you do things like use certain moves, let opponents kick out of a pinfall, or things like that. And usually when you complete them, there's some sort of little cutscene in the middle of the fight to kind of spice it up. And you'll also get extra rewards when you finish the fight. Think of them like mini challenges. Overall, I'd say I like the combat. It's really unique, really leans into the wrestling aspect, and shines really brightly in boss battles, where you have to manage that hype meter a lot. I will say that I feel like the game could have had better pacing. Dungeons, for the most part, felt like they were just a little too long, maybe just 1 or 2 too many fights, or 1 or 2 too many puzzles. Because the fights are so involved with these timed button presses, you can't really just blast through them like a normal turn-based RPG. You really have to kind of slog through them near the end to get to the boss battles. That said, the boss battles were always fun and always worth it. Something else I found kind of odd was that when you hit enemies, it shows their health meter and how much damage you did, but when you're choosing your next attack and which enemy to hit, it won't show their health meter again, so you kind of just have to remember. I felt like you should either always know what their health is, or you should never know. I just kind of felt like that was a weird design choice. Now, something that's not weird and is absolutely awesome is the game's presentation, so let's take a look at that. I love that pixel art continues to evolve in so many cool ways, and WrestleQuest genuinely has some of the best pixel art I've ever seen in an RPG. To me, it's all in the little details. It's all in the characters, how they move, how they animate, all the different little flourishes on all their costumes, the environments and how the lighting kind of shimmers off things and glows. It looks incredible, as well as the user interface. It all just looks stellar. To me, I feel like it all comes together and shines brightest during the combat. Here you not only have all the characters performing their various moves, but you have the crowd and they're moving around with the different signs. There's tons of flashes going off, as well as all the user interface elements blending together so smoothly. I don't know, I just feel like it looks incredibly cohesive during combat. I feel like overall the best compliment I can give the game's presentation is that it has a distinct style. Whenever you look at it, you just know this is WrestleQuest. Now, the only stain on an otherwise stellar presentation was the water. I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe it's too far zoomed out, or maybe I don't have my graphics setting right, but it looked really fuzzy and pixely, if that makes sense. I'm not sure how this is going to translate in the video, but to me, it just didn't look quite right. Also, in the intro, the snow area flickers really badly. Thankfully, that's the only area I ever saw that did that, but it was really noticeable. In terms of music, it has a fantastic collection of synth tracks. It sets the tone right away on the title title screen and keeps it going in all aspects of the game. Whether through story moments, combat, or just exploring the world, it's all incredible. But the combat music in particular is a highlight as it gets you really pumped up for each fight. Now, speaking of music, what's kind of cool is you can pick your entrance music when you walk out for boss fights. Now, granted, this is a limited selection of songs, but it is cool that you can pick it nonetheless. I absolutely loved my time with WrestleQuest. It's clear after playing for just a few hours that the development team has a deep reverence not only for classic JRPGs, but wrestling culture on a whole. There are so many fun Easter eggs and cool design choices that help the game stand out. But there are also a few odd design choices and pacing issues that hold it back a little bit. But honestly, if you liked anything you saw in this video, I think it'll be right up your alley. Especially if you're in that perfect Venn diagram of loving JRPGs and pro wrestling, then man, WrestleQuest is an absolute must-buy for you. Now, if you're purely an RPG fan, you may not get as much out of it as it definitely leans into the wrestling aspect pretty deeply, but it's still a solid RPG with great mechanics on its own. Now, if you want to check the game out, I'll leave a link in the description. It's available on every platform. And thanks once again to Skybound Games for providing me an early code and for sponsoring this video. Your support of the channel truly means a lot as well. Now, if you want to see what other JRPGs are still set to release in 2023, be sure to check out this video right here. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegaming shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.